Hello, I'm Dr. Jigare Pancha, an occupational therapist. So here I have got you the another video of infections and tumors of musculoskeletal system. There are many more videos to know more things. Stay tuned to our channel. So in the previous classes, lectures, we had talked many things about osteomyelitis and infection, the treatment procedures related to this, and about the last first presentation of the chronic post-traumatic osteomyelitis. Then you have the medical management and the OT point of view of it, clinical symptoms and diagnostic procedures, medical history, clinical findings. Basically, you see that uh, if any patient may be accompanied by pain or fever, the patient mainly be affected by pungent pus odor, that is a change in microbes may alter this, or inability to bathe in public pools, inability to work due to pus discharge in the occupations involve food, hospitality, bakery, butcher shop, many other, and reduced physical capabilities. So there are certain things which we have discussed previously with the uh, investigation procedures or imagings as well, like standard X-rays, computed tomography, three-phase or anti-granulocyte scintigraphy, MRI, fistulography. So like that, likewise you have treatments indication like chronic fistula, chronic pain, lack of consolidation, chronic infection, arthritis, or you have soft tissue defect, surgical management like localized debridement, intramedullary reaming, and bone grafting measures, plastic defect closures. Then you have specific treatment options like revision of metaphyseal intramedullary cavities with pedicle muscle flaps, especially tibial plateau basically. So, and then you have prognosis and complications with clearly identifiable causes and rigorous procedures. For example, localized removal of the sequestra, intramedullary reaming, even for extensive disease. So the prospects of healing are around 80 to 90% over the long term. So a relapse cannot be ruled out even after a dormancy period of more than 10 years. Fistula carcinomas are very rare. So this is all what we have discussed before in the previous lectures, in the previous classes, if you say. So now we'll discuss today about the differential diagnosis which is used at chronic hematogenous osteomyelitis in adults. So this is a very different topic of this. So here let me discuss that uh, it, it is about homogeneous osteomyelitis. As the term homogeneous osteomyelitis is means of the extremities is mainly an illness that affects children and adolescents. In acute or primary chronic cases, it is initially localized in the metaphysis, as you can see in the images which are shown here. So this image, I have divided this into images basically. In the second slide also there is another part of it, the D and E. In first slide, in this slide you have part A, B and C. So this is a 8-year-old age female with the acute hemorrhagenesis osteomyelitis with no evidence of bacteria. So the image A presents a pre and post operative following curettage and drainage, and B refers after 2, and C is 7 years. The metaphyseal focus migrates successively towards the diaphysis with massive shaft thickening. As you can see, there is very much thickening at the C if you compare with the A. So this is what happens in this kind of cases and issues. So on that basis, see that as I told that if it persists, then it migrates successfully towards the diaphysis, which becomes enlarged, and in some cases, hugely so. So residual traces of chronic osteomyelitis in adults are very rare nowadays. in countries with good medical care and occur almost extensively in elderly patients. So this is what we see here. And the patients who had infections during adolescence in the era before antibiotics and in immigrants from developing countries will you will see these things in them. Also, there are certain cases of osteomyelitis following severe accidents during childhood or adolescence may stimulate chronic or hematogenous osteomyelitis. New cases of hematogenous osteomyelitis in adults typically affect the spine and rarely the long bones. So, for example, with uh, brucellosis or tuberculosis, the risk is elevated with prolonged steroid therapy and immunosuppression. So that's what we see here in these categories. Then you have clinical symptoms and diagnostic procedures. So the medical history and the clinical findings. So if you see that the adult patient with chronic hematogenous osteomyelitis are usually aware of their suppurating illness during adolescence, which often involved prolonged hospital stays and surgical procedures. So, after years without any symptoms, patients consult with doctors concerning painful swelling and fistula that have reopened. So, others experience intermittent swelling and or severe load independent pain without fistula or any actual signs of infection from adolescence onwards. So, there is no accident history basically. So, the scars from the earlier fistula tracks, uh, differences in length, axis deviations of the affected area of the skeleton are often noticeable during examination. Just keep in mind when I'm telling these things because that will be relating it with the other things like the physical and the functional perspective of it. In laboratory testing, you have often normal or somewhat elevated CRP values which provide little information. In painful non-fistulating forms, bacteriological tests are often negative. In imaging, if you see that the examination methods they correspond to those used for the chronic post-traumatic osteomyelitis, and there is a lack of a history of early accident, so the changes are in the metadiaphysis, and that's how the things are being responding at the particular uh, issue. So I will just like to brief you about the clinical symptoms and diagnostic procedures. Then the medical history and clinical findings will be like a development without interruption from a post-traumatic infection or the secondary presentation following an asymptomatic interval lasting months to decades. Then start of a new episode characterized by a gradual or sudden recurrence of erythema, alternating fistula occurrence and closure accompanied by retention pain. Then may be accompanied by the pain and fever. Patients are mainly affected by the pungent pus odor. A change in microbes may alter this. Inability to bathe in public pools, inability to work due to pus discharge in occupation like food or any related to it, and reduced physical capabilities. Then very rarely a fistula carcinoma develops, usually only with fistulas that have been present for decades. These tend to be only locally aggressive and rarely metastasize. And that's how the laboratory findings and the findings it's, for that there are certain standard X-rays and tomographic, but the CRP levels basically, as I just mentioned, is of very much use at the initial stages, and uh, uh, and that's how it is used. So the treatment indications basically chronic fistula and chronic pain. So in this, these are the treatment indications at certain level of this thing. And in the next slide, we'll be talking more about the surgical management of this hematogenous osteomyelitis, which are in adults. So as this hematogenous osteomyelitis, basically, it has certain classifications like acute osteomyelitis, which I'll be talking further in the next classes of of osteomyelitis basically. Just for your understanding, I'd like to brief out the classification, that is acute osteomyelitis and chronic osteomyelitis. So in such cases of acute osteomyelitis, you have hematogenous osteomyelitis, you have acute unifocal osteomyelitis, specific forms like acute multifocal osteomyelitis, neonatal osteomyelitis, uh, spondylodiscitis, and chronic osteomyelitis, and then you have primary chronic osteomyelitis, specific forms like Gary sclerosing osteomyelitis, and CRMO, that is multifocal chronic recurrent osteomyelitis. Then specific osteomyelitis like tuberculosis, BCG, exogenous, that is secondary osteomyelitis, post-traumatic, post-operative, and infectious arthritis. So these are certain forms, and in acute hematogenous osteomyelitis, as I mentioned, there are certain forms that represents an etiology and pathology that vary typically in children and adolescents. Bacteria generally enter in metaphyses of long bone as a result of bacteriemia, and then due to the specific vascular anatomy with spiral arterioles, it is particularly easy, you can say, for the bacterial colonies to develop within the metaphyses. So the phagocytes on the other side is associated with the vascular tissue which are absent around these vessels. So this this encourages the bacterial damage to the endothelium with the secondary thrombosis and resulting in necrosis of the otherwise exceptionally well vascularized metaphyses. So the source of infection generally remains unknown, maybe nasal or oral cavities, skin, or respiratory tract, gastrointestinal tract, urogenital system. But the site of infection generally remains restricted locally, and leads to metaphyseal osteolysis. Uh, if the process is not halted through therapy, this may result in certain subperiosteal abscesses or infectious arthritis. So basically, in subperiosteal abscess, you have bacteria may multiply significantly in the transition zone between the arterioles and the venous sinusoids, and the local inflammatory uh, process, which increases the permeability of the blood vessels, leading to purulence in the subperiosteal area. Subsequently, a perforation through the metaphyseal cortex, which may occur. Also, there is infectious arthritis. So, in this, you have areas where there is a direct contact between the metaphyseal and the joint capsule. The subperiosteal abscess can penetrate the adjacent joint, triggering the secondary septic arthritis. So, this can typically occur both in hip and the knee. So, in children, I mean, say in infants and in small children up to the age of say 3, joint infections frequently occur in about one third of the cases, as there are more blood vessels crossing the epiphyseal plates in this age group than in older age. I mean, older children, basically. That's why the incidence and localization. Let me just share this thing, this facts, that the incidence varies considerably and appears to be decreasing in the industrialized nations. About 3 new infections per 1 lakh children are detected each year. So the acute hematogenous osteomyelitis can be located at any site in any bone. However, it is observed more frequently in the metaphyses of the long bone. Sites of the predilection also include the pelvis and the spine as well. So if you can imagine that if there is a problem in the spine, how much issue it can occur not only in the functional capability of the person, but also the child is lots of is the major verge of dependence on his guardian or the parents. So you have to see this particular form. This is all about the medical background of this, which I am sharing with you. But we as a therapist, we should be able to understand the thing, that how it can affect the person's occupation, the person function, the person's normal movement of the limb, his musculature, normal alignment of the line, and the force generated. So everything, the kinematics, dynamics, body mechanics, joint protection, at sometimes energy conservation is also needed to be accompanied with this kind of therapeutical procedures, because this is very much important to understand. and to move ahead. So there are certain just let me share you that there are certain uh, laboratory diagnostics like differential blood count, non-specific, C creative protein CRP levels, and erythrocyte sedimentation rate at ESR are generally strongly elevated basically. So in imaging diagnostics, you have ultrasound, which is direct examination to identify and subperiosteal abscess and joint diffusion. Then scintigraphy, basically only of the diagnostic relevance if local aspiration like joint abscess and blood cultures are negative. Then MRI, that is compared to X-ray imaging. This is a more sensitive means of diagnosis. Then I mean that was MRI, and X-ray imaging used for the long-term follow-up. Then then in microbiology, that is this varies with typically pathogens depending on the patient's age. That is infants under the 2 months age, that is Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus agalacti, and then gram negative enterobacterial, as well as the Candida albicans. Children even under age of 3 and older children have primarily Staphylococcus aureus and Streptococcus pyogenes, and currently these are increasing numbers of the methicillin persistent staphylococci, that is MSRA. So these are certain microbiological findings which I'm just sharing with you, and this how the things occur in these aspects of the treatment or these issues. So let's talk further about the surgical procedures which are uh, related to hematogenous osteomyelitis in the next slide. So now here there are surgical treatment. So in principle, the same treatment options are available as for chronic post-traumatic osteomyelitis. The targeted antibiotic treatment is often not possible if there are no detectable pathogens. Nonetheless, histological testing indicate inflammation or infection. So this is mainly related to this hematogenous osteomyelitis, and localized debridement, that is if there is a fistula and sequestra can be detected, then proceed. Then it should be proceed as then it will be the same as I mentioned before about the other treatment procedures and the surgical procedures which are being used for the delay first presentation of the infected non-union and the sorry, not that non-union, but there are certain surgical procedures like debridement and sample collection. So I like to share this actually surgical procedures basically, so which are about the resection. If you, because I mentioned before only that if you find a kind of fistula or sequestra, then to follow is to resection of the fistula and abscess membranes after staining. Need to complete metal removal including broken screws, parts, drill bits, remaining cement beads, and many other removal of all sequestra. This is not about domain, but still I'm just sharing with the for the information. Then resection of the necrotic bone, that is characterized by the absence of bleeding points and the major splintering when struck with a chisel. Ensure bone debridement is complete by releasing the uh, tourniquet at the end. So there are certain medical or surgical procedures which we have not to be seen, but just because what procedures are done, it has certain time period of healing. So this gives you a certain set of frame at how much did what extent you are supposed to proceed, and what can be the prognosis and the further rehabilitation procedure for the patient. That's why I'm sharing this with you, so it's easy for the this audience to understand. In stabilization, there are options which include immediate stabilization with external fixation, the two-stage procedure with temporary immobilization, that is orthosis in in term. Then the interim period provides basically the time for the additional clarification and curative antibiotic treatment in the absence of foreign material with difficult to treat bacteria. Unlocking intermedial nailing during the second stage is an example of tubercular bone reconstruction that enables early full mobilization. That bone grafting measures, the goal should always be full length reconstruction depending on the extent of the defects, uh, like autologous cancellous bone grafting that is preferably for the posterior iliac crest on the same side. Then there is segment transport using an Elizarov fixator for the defects with length losing ranging from about 4 centimeter to 15 centimeters even. So the method usually heals skin defects and scar zones simultaneously because the segment transport procedure stretches healthy skin too. And you have in the procedures you have extensive resection of the affected bone segment to ensure that the adjoining osteotomies are vital. Metadiaphyseal corticotomy without uh, severing the medullary vessels, if possible, distraction of the corticotomy site by about certain 1 mm and to wait for certain days. Then you have free vascularized bone grafts with and without simultaneous shaft of muscle and skin areas. Then you have bone allografts, then bone morphogenic proteins, that is BMP basically is called 2 and 7. Then bone replacement materials, like the positive effects of all other bone replacement materials in clinical use are significantly less well documented though. Then there are so these are how you will see in the surgical management and procedures of it. Then you have there is you have the prognosis and complications related to this. But these are certain facts which I like to share about the treatment if you have any kind of fistula or sequestra seen in the area. Then there is intramedullary reaming. So the entire bone area to be treated is infected. So the bone is inflated with the cystic changes up to the surface of some places. So there is no cortex reinforced with the periosteal bone regeneration. So the metaphysio diaphyseal location with massive bone thickening makes it impossible to perform a classic intermedullary reaming procedure, which would mainly expand the unaffected diaphysis uh, proximally to the affected zone. So as a result, if you see, any revision must begin with an extensive fenestration of the bone. So the affected bone can only be removed up to a point that ensures that surgical strength is maintained. So radical segment resection is risky. It would place the vitality of the only remaining epiphysis at risk and make the reconstruction of the defect extremely complicated. So this is how basically is seen in the surgical procedures that how it is called. So basically when you have this kind of patient, so and it is more of a in the younger ages, so it is very important because these ages will like to move around and that is what suits to the particular age and their occupation. So we need to see their weight loading capacity, their ambulations, their transfers. So these are all certain things which we can take care and which helps them to perform their normal ADL, like personal ADLs, like also dressing and moving around and shifting. So this is very much important because in these cases there are chances of having a further damage, and they should not damage further in by moving around or having an abnormal alignment of the weight. So body mechanics joint protection is very much important, and further as I mentioned energy conservation as well. So you have certain prognosis and complications. So the prognosis is favorable with the active fistula and localizable sequestra, but unreliable for attempted reconstruction involving extensive findings with chronic pain. because you can say that such as fistula carcinoma, complications like fistula carcinoma are also very rare. So that's what means uh, it is important, because when there is a reconstruction attempted, there are chances of very much chronic pain, and this totally restricts the movement, because pain is such a symptom which doesn't allow the individual to perform to the fullest and give certain kind of restrictions in his performance of the movement. And there are certain important things which you should consider, which should not be uh, these are the things which should not be considered actually, which are like you can say don'ts basically. So that is the empirical antibiotic therapy alone for a wound with impaired healing following osteosynthesis, which is not preferable basically. Then delayed surgical treatment of a varied infection, unless it is performed as a part of a targeted plan with temporary suppressive antibiotic therapy and definitive healing following successful bridging. So, and that is also not preferable. Then exclusively surgical and topical treatment of an early infection in the joint region and incipient arthritis with antiseptics, but without antibiotics. Then exclusively antibiotic therapy without surgical revision. Then leaving large isolated bone fragments or sequestra in an infected environment in the hope of reintegration. That is also a very false hope, and which is not to be performed, because when they remember one thing, because when there is the presence of any kind of infection, the healing is not possible. So that will cause, as I discussed further, non-healing, delayed union, even sometimes healed then is malunion if there is a misalignment of the bone fragments, because there are certain factors, mechanical factors, the infections which causes the delay in the healing. When there is infection, the healing is not possible. That is very much important to understand and to keep in mind, and to move in that direction and to understand the things in that form. So that's all was for the osteomyelitis in this parts of the lecture. Further also I'll be discussing with you the other facts and figures about the other infections and tumors of the musculoskeletal system, and in detail osteo also the infections of osteoarthritis, or infections of arthritis. That is very important to understand. This is all I'll be discussing with you. So in this today, in this parts I have covered, that is infected osteosynthesis, infected non-union, and chronic osteomyelitis. And in further lecture, so this so that my in this all classes, all we have discussed about non-union of the bone and the delayed union and the other aspects which are hindering in the performance of the healing of the fracture, and many other things. Also we'll be discussing more about the infectious arthritis and the osteomyelitis, the types of osteomyelitis, and spondylodisc disc citis, and as I mentioned before, that we will be discussing more further on the soft tissue infections, but that is very rare. I'll be covering most of I'll be covering, that is osteomyelitis basically, because that is the major topic of all the infections of musculoskeletal system, but mainly I'll be talking about osteomyelitis. And there can be infection in the open wounds, which is also important to understand. Diabetic foot also is uh, uh, very much prone to the infections and to be taken care. But osteomyelitis and infectious arthritis in children and adolescents, as I'll be covering in detail in the further lectures for your understanding in certain cases. So that's all for the topic or the infections of the musculoskeletal system, and related to this, as I mentioned before with the headings, I'll be discussing in my next lectures. Thank you. I have mentioned the references here for you to go and to have the deeper knowledge of the subject, and to clear any doubts if you have any.